We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The TURTZED podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com. Through her coaching and education, she helps those who have experienced narcissistic abuse reclaim control and rebuild their lives. Through How to Love a Battered Woman, she empowers you and helps you build healthy relationships. Nia Renee, welcome to TURTZED.
Thank you for having me, Charles. I love you so much. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me here.
One of the things that I'm excited about for today's conversation is not just you sharing your journey, but sharing more about the coaching. And I will be the first to admit, I can definitely learn a few things about building healthy relationships. So we are going to dive straight into it.
Let's go for it.
For me, in addition to your content, I think something that stuck out to me is the title of your handles, How to Love a Battered Woman. When I saw that, it brought me back in therapy to lots of conversations I've had around how you can fully heal from relationships, from trauma, from things that have altered the course of your life. And part of that is a question that sometimes I wonder, which is, how much can you actually heal? And how do you learn to trust again and build those healthy relationships? And does that look different, or does that have to look different because of your lived experience or my lived experience? And so I'd be curious, what prompted you to build out your brand with How to Love a Battered Woman?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So in 2018, I was in a relationship with someone who I refer to as Mr. Narcissist. If you've read my book, Letters to You, which I brought you a copy of today, period. And at the time, I didn't realize I was in another abusive relationship. And we were having issues with communicating with each other, and me trying to express to him why I needed things to be a certain way with how we communicated with each other, with the way that we went about intimacy, the way that we went about our sex life, and just the way that we interacted with each other. And it seemed like we were bumping heads on how to do that. So I had this moment where I was like, you know what? I know not everybody has ever been in a relationship with someone who has endured trauma, especially at the extent that I've endured trauma. And so I literally was like, I got to teach him how to love a battered woman. And so then this idea sparked, and I immediately went and registered the domain because I was like, I'm going to blog through this. And at first I thought, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to blog my journey, and I'm actually going to write a book, How to Love a Battered Woman. But it actually turned into a journal, and I literally was giving my abuser a roadmap on how to love me. And the more that we started to dive into that, the more the abuse started to get more evident because he was getting increasingly angry. We actually got into an argument when we were in the car on the way back from my parents' house. And my parents live in the mountains, and at the time we were living in the mountains together. And so it was like maybe like 45 minutes apart. But the drive from my parents' house to his house was like this huge argument erupted, and he was victim blaming me. He was screaming, he was yelling, he was punching the steering wheel, all because of this journal that he bought me to be able to have this moment. And so then it started clicking slowly that I was in an abusive relationship, but I really still wanted to talk and discuss more about the ways that people who have endured trauma, we need to be loved a certain way. And sometimes we have to teach people how to love us. We have to tell people how to love us. And the only reason why it's called How to Love a Battered Woman is because I can only speak from a woman's perspective. And so a lot of times it gets confused that my demographic or the people that I'm reaching out to are women or people who identify as women. And that's not the case. Like, but it's just because I can only speak from my womanhood and lived experience as a woman. And so that's really where it came from. And the more I started doing it, the more I started talking, the more I started sharing my story about the things that I went through, the more my abuser became pissed off about it. And then the lights just started, like, the red light just started going off. It started as a blog and thinking I was going to write a book, to 6 years ago to where I am now is not even something that I envisioned or it even started at. So that's the crazy part.
When you think about that journey and you talk about it impacting everyone, I think one thing that stuck out to me is that, yes, you're speaking from your experience. And also, what resonates in what you talk about are specific examples of things that may be more minor that build up. And as you shared in the story, things had built up as you started journaling more and more. Through that transition, when you started to realize something is not right here, how did you start to put the pieces together through that journaling?
I laugh because I'm currently in the process of putting the pieces together through journaling, identifying my childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm laughing because I realize how much journaling has really changed and, like, saved my life in a way, because it's a documented place of where I've been able to get out my feelings and my emotions. I have a safe space of where I can accurately express, like, what's going on. What was the question again?
Well, I think, well, one, I think it's really important for everyone to find their own outlet. It can be
Hmm.
journaling, it can be therapy, it can be, sharing with a family member or a friend that you trust to start that process. For you specifically, it was the journaling that the sort of red lights started turning on. When you think about that time period where you started to feel like something's off and then started to realize what was off, what was that experience like for you to start to put those pieces together?
It's such a visceral experience. I think it's something where, especially when you've suffered trauma at the depths of which I'm now being validated and confirmed the trauma that I've experienced, especially in my childhood. But it's a situation where your body is feeling these things and you don't know if you should trust it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's questioning whether, is this really happening, or am I just used to my abusive background? And especially when you're in a situation where you're being gaslit and told that you're only feeling this way or you're whatever because of the things that you've gone through. And I had to trust what my body was telling me. I had to lean into that. And my best friend in the world, who is someone that, I'm married, and I tell my husband this all the time, but she is the other half of my heart. Like, she stood on business and she stood by my side and she's still by my side. But being able to bounce that off of her, and then her putting it in plainly and then making me say out loud, I'm in an abusive relationship, and having that validation from an outside perspective where I'm not being gaslit by someone else or being forced to stay or told I'm relying on my past. So I have this journal, I have the feelings and the things that I'm experiencing, and then it's being validated by an outside source who knows me very well, but it can be objective. And so when you put those two things together, that's when I started to realize, okay, something's really off here.
Mm-hmm.
And because my stepmom is like, well, all of your relationships, you can't have relationships. Your relationships fail because of you. You're stuck in the past and da 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 da. So she is inadvertently doing the work for him, and he doesn't even know that he has a flying monkey that's doing the dirty work for him for free. And so you get trapped in this cycle of abuse. So it was really good having in real time seeing what I'm going through, and then have my best friend who knows me and knows the situation, knows my past, and can see and kind of zoom out and look at it from a full picture. That's where things started to really click and start to make sense. And then I realized that there was nothing that I was ever going to be able to do that would make him happy, that I was never going to be good enough. And once those things clicked into place, I was like, I gotta go. I gotta get out of this, because this is not a place where I should be.
There's so much there. I mean, you shared so many incredible points. I think almost in reverse order, but coming to that realization and saying, I'm never going to be good enough, no matter what I do, is so hard, because on one side of it, it plays into those repeating patterns that you spoke about from childhood, which I'm going to come back to in a second. So you're telling yourself, I'm not good enough for this person that I love. And also, you are saying that's because this is not a healthy relationship. And the dichotomy of that can be so hard to process, because it's recreating the pattern, as you mentioned, from from your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I think the interesting middle part for me was hearing that you aren't good at relationships from someone that is in your life that is putting the blame on you, and not understanding or seeing that it's not that you're not good at relationships, it's that the example of a relationship, again, from childhood, is being recreated, is being replayed out in an unhealthy way, and it isn't a healthy relationship. You should not be in those relationships, and we have to, all of us, put together what healing looks like in those situations to be able to move past them and find someone who can meet us where we are and build a strong foundation in a different relationship dynamic.
I love what you said just now, though, like meeting us where we are. And I came to that realization a couple of years ago, that you stop trying to love me where you want me to be, and love me where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. It's like like sometimes, especially when we get into the realms of narcissistic relationships, abusive relationships, and I think just abuse in general, like we like to attach narcissistic and narcissism and stuff to it, because we obviously it's like, okay, great, we have a name to it. But zooming out, abuse in general, right? We get to this place where the abusers have this expectation of us, and that's where they want us to be, but they keep moving the goalpost. And so no matter how close we get to it, they just keep moving it. And that goes for a lot of people who don't have the capacity or the emotional intelligence to deal with someone who has endured intense trauma, and again needs to be loved in a certain way, instead of wanting to love us in the way that we need to be loved in, and accepting us for who we are, where we're at. They want to love us where they want us to be, and that's an unfair expectation to have. And I will never be able to fulfill an expectation that you have of me that doesn't exist for me. That's not my reality. I think that's really good that you touched on that.
It has to be the case, because to go back to How to Love a Battered Woman, when you have these traumas, especially from childhood, they're so ingrained, and they take so much work to unravel and to take a web and untangle it. And I guess from your experience with your childhood trauma and these relationships, and then working through those experiences to better understand, to be able to get into a healthy relationship where you are today, what was that experience like for you to put in that work and understand it better, so that you could then find someone who could understand you better?
Yeah. Well, I will say, like, I am in the most amazing relationship I think I've ever been in my life, with someone who makes me safe, helps me feel safe, but he is my safe space in every aspect of the word that I've never had. And I'm unpacking that in therapy right now. I'm doing EMDR. And for those that don't know what EMDR is, that's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and it helps you reprocess the trauma you've endured. And you go back to certain ego states that you have, and certain versions of yourself in life in certain places. And my husband is present in every single one of those. And so when we look at that, and you look at the fact that I met someone who's been able to love me in every single area of my life, every stage of my life, and we've only been together for 4.5 years, it blows my mind. To get to that, I needed to take a step back and see I needed to get to the deep root of it. So when I left Mr. Narcissist, I said, okay, I need to go to therapy. I've been hearing about EMDR for years, and I already had a talk therapist at the time. So I went into EMDR, shout out to Dusty. Um, and I specifically picked a male EMDR therapist because I needed to address my issues that I had with men, my fear that I had with men. And Dusty, you called me out, sir, immediately. The moment I sat down on his couch, he asked me a question, and I was not making eye contact with him. And he goes, "Why can't you make eye contact with me?" I was like, all right, I'm going to grab my stuff. I got to go because this is too much already. Like, I was like, I can't do this. You're already
He called you out in the first 5
called
minutes.
me out. Not even the first 5 minutes. It was like maybe 45 seconds. And I was like, yep, all right, got to go. But, I stayed and I dug into it. And he really saw me. And it's important when you have someone that sees you. And the further we went and I started unpacking, and then I realized it all went back to my mother. All of it rooted back to my mom. And a lot of it rooted back to my stepmother as well, that I'm starting to unpack currently. But once I was able to identify where the trends and the patterns of this came from, and I realized that I've just been in relationships with different versions of my mom, whether it was platonically, romantically, business relationships, managers, work life relationships. They've all been different versions of my mother. And once I was able to realize where it came from, I was able to navigate and realize what it was that I needed to do for myself. And I needed to start putting myself first because I had been putting myself on the back burner because I'm a recovering people pleaser. So what I did was I, over the course of like a year and maybe a year and a quarter or a year and a half, I did talk therapy and EMDR weekly. So I'm seeing Mary, shout out to Mary. I'm seeing Mary on, like, say I'll see Mary like on a Monday and I'll see Dusty on a Wednesday. And so I literally weekly seeing 2 different therapists weekly doing different types of work. Sometimes leaving EMDR and driving back home, I literally feel like I just got into a physical altercation. Like, this is not easy work that I'm doing. I would have several breakdowns. I was crying, but I was still doing the work. And mind you, during this time, by the way, I know you know that I'm a 6-time brain surgery survivor. So during this time, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my health. I get my first brain diagnosis. I have to have 2 major surgeries before I even have my brain surgery. And so I'm doing all of this while I'm unpacking my trauma and trying to figure out why I keep falling for the same type of person. Because I'm pansexual, so I've dated several different types of people, and my romantic relationships are all pretty much very similar in a way. And so I reached a place where I was like, okay, I'm recovering from brain surgery. I'm having to get to know who I am again, which, I was told in the beginning of that first brain surgery that I was going to have to figure out a lot of things were going to change. So I'm getting to know who I am now, post brain surgery, post abuse, and unpacking my trauma. And so I have no idea who I am. I have no idea what I want. So many things about me had changed, like my handwriting, my taste in certain foods, like the way that I experience things. A lot of things changed for me personality-wise. So I'm trying to figure all of this out. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll get on some apps, whatever, see if I want to start dating. But all the themes were the same. It's like everyone was just like pretending to want to be in a relationship, but was ultimately looking just to hook up. And I was not in my hookup girl phase. I was like, I'm over that. Like, I'm tired of being what someone wants me to be for them sexually, but they never want me to be that. Like, they don't want me to be a place for them intellectually, intimately. They don't want to be that for me, but they just want me. They just want me for what I can offer them with my body. So I'm navigating through trauma and I'm figuring out what my deal breakers are and figuring out what red flags to watch for. I'm learning how to trust myself. I'm repairing that relationship with myself. And I did a 6 months, like a 6 month sex cleanse. I was like, I'm not sharing my body with anybody. I don't want to share intimacy with anyone. Like, I really need some clarity. I need to just like take a step back and figure out like what the fuck is going on, if I can say
Go for it.
that. I really need to figure out what the fuck's going on. And then, so there was this guy that I met that, you know, we went on a few dates and then he realized that like he wasn't ready for a relationship, but he was down to be friends with benefits, whatever. So after I did my 6 months cleanse, I was like, okay, cool. Like, you know, I've got needs too, is what it is. Had a little situationship going on, but he knew that I was looking for a relationship. And so during that, you know, I'm not sleeping around with people, but I'm going on dates, but I still have my situationship, and he knows what's going on. So 2 birds, 1 stone, right? Like I kind of have my cake and I'm eating it too. The perfect situation. And so I'm on Bumble and I'm like, okay, whatever, I'm getting over it. And then I get to like this guy that really caught my attention, my husband. And I was so done. I was like, okay, this is my last date. Like, I'm going to take a break. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I had gotten to that mindset of like, you know what? I'm so comfortable with who I am right now. And I'm okay if I find a relationship. And I'm also okay if I don't find a relationship. I'm good. Like, I just, you know, if I can have that addition to my life, great. But I will not have a subtraction to my life. And so I met my husband. We went on our first date. And then we went on our second date, like maybe 18 hours later. And here we are. We're married. And, you know, so, but it was, yeah, it was an experience.
Well, it was a journey, and I think
Yeah.
there's 3 parts of it that I heard, and I think the overarching part to where you finished was finding who you are, understanding what you were looking for, what you were not looking for, building almost a rubric for dating. I want to go back for a second to where you started, which was all of the health issues you were going through, the surgeries, understanding that, figuring all those things out, unpacking the trauma, figuring out getting out of a relationship, all of those pieces of it. When you're in that phase, there are so many times that I've personally been in therapy where I'm like, what can we just figure out what is my life going to look like if I never get into a relationship, or if I can't figure these triggers out. What made you keep going? What inside you said, no, I refuse to settle where I'm at?
That's a great question. I have always genuinely been looking for that genuine love that I deserved and still deserve. And I was not going to stop until I got it. And whether that required I took breaks from dating, took a step back, and then kept going again, I knew who I was. I knew what I wanted, and I was not going to settle for less. And so I applied that. I applied my lived experience into my dating life. And I absolutely refused, no matter how lonely I got, no matter how many nights it was cold, the other side of my bed was cold, and I really needed that companionship. I wanted that intimacy. I wanted that safety, to have that safety that comes with a sex life, a healthy sex life in a relationship. And I told myself that we were going to find that. And I often talk to myself like it's like we're having conversations right now, like having this conversation right now. I will talk to myself like that and say, we got this, we're going to do this, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to get it done, because I'm talking to my inner child that tends to go into fight or flight mode
Mm-hmm.
because of my childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talk to myself that way because it helps my brain understand that we're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And my ultimate goal was that I just wanted to find that companionship that I was not going to stop until I found that person that I was begging on my hands and knees to my previous relationships to be. Literally crying and begging for them to just fucking love me. Like, stop abusing me. Like, please just love me. I wanted to be loved so bad. I still do have abandonment issues that I'm working with because of the relationship that I had with my mother. And I absolutely refused to allow myself to continue to be in that cycle of abuse. That's that part that changes who I am and what I want at the core, because then she still wins and my abusers win. And I had to push through that. And when I met my husband changed the game. Absolutely changed the game. And the way that I went into that last, when I decided that this was going to be my last like Bumble date, this is going to be for a while, like I need to take a break. I went in it with zero expectations at all. So like regardless, my feelings weren't going to be hurt if it worked out or if it didn't, if it did work out or if it didn't work out. It just so happened that it worked out. And we've been locked in ever since.
As you were talking, I think the thing that connects the two is that everything you were begging for from the person that you were in a relationship with, you had to find in yourself first. You had to put in the work. You had to understand who you were, what you wanted, and truly love yourself with everything, the good, the bad, the flaws, everything.
Yeah.
In order to be able to find that. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the hardest part of the journey,
Yeah.
because we all make mistakes. We all have to reflect on them. And I think a lot of that probably came up in the journaling you did during, before, after, everywhere. I'd be curious, as you go towards coaching and working with people from your lived experience, which I think is so powerful in this specific type of coaching, not to be their therapist, but to be able to say, this was my lived experience, and, understand what reflects for them. What does a coaching relationship look like with you to find a way to build a healthy relationship?
Yeah. So you really have to do the work. And I think that's the most important part about understanding going into whether it's therapy. I mean, I recommend therapy and coaching because they're two very kind of different things, and they're structured very differently. I'm here to be your coach. I'm here to give you the tools, right? Like I'm writing the plays for you. You have to execute those plays. You have to be willing to show up and practice. You have to be willing to do the drills. You have to be willing to do the exercises. I love a good sports analogy. I played basketball, volleyball, ran track. Like that was really who I was. And so being a coach, you're the one that has the knowledge. You've been there before. You can see the entire field, right? You can see how a play is going to work out, and the client has to understand that they have to be willing to put in the work. And so the coaching relationship with me is, so basically what happens is if like a client, they'll book a session with me, whether it's a single session or if they book a package. And obviously, if you're wanting a good outcome, you're wanting to see the results, you have to do more than one session. But what I do is we'll talk and I'll listen to what they're saying, and then I will literally build them a custom coaching plan. And it includes exercises, it includes 5 targeted goals and areas that we're going to focus on, but it has exercises that you need to do before session. It has a timeline of when you need to do it before we get to session. There are in sessions, so it depends on the client. But I do it that way because the client has to be willing to do the work. I have a client I met when I did a workshop in September, and they booked a session with me. I built out a custom coaching plan, and based on my recommendations, I recommended 6 sessions because I was like, this is what we need to do and why we need to do it this way. We are just getting on we're moving into session 3, but from the evaluation session that we had till now, I can already see the difference because she's putting in the work. She's doing what needs to be done, and she's so solid and confident in the decisions that she's making because she's doing the work. And we all have to do the work. We can't. Sometimes people just show up and they want the answer right away, and it's like I can't give you the answer, but I can give you the tools to help you find the answers you're looking for. And I do a lot of this by my lived experience. Everything that, especially when I have clients that are ready to start dating again, because I coach. I have clients in different phases. Those that are still in abusive relationships that are trying to get out. Those that aren't quite ready to date yet, but they want to work on repairing that relationship with themselves. They want to understand what they went through, and they want to really unpack some things and try to find the next route that they want to take. And then I have clients that want to go into dating, and it's called intentional dating. That is such a huge thing, and that's what I did in my lived experience, was dating with intent. And so that's how I crafted my coaching business, is literally off of the results that I got by the things that I did, and I tailor it to each client because obviously all of our stories are not going to be the same, but they all are crafted in a way that helps the client grow and see what they need to do. And I've had clients have some incredible results. I have a client who she's actually in South Africa. She got to a place where I was at when I started dating my husband. Like, I'm okay if I'm in a relationship. I'm also okay if I'm not in a relationship. And I think that's the most important part. And like what you touched on, and you said, when we look at relationships, we often forget the relationship with ourselves. And I'm just going to let that sit. We're going to let that just sit for a second, right?
Say it again.
Oftentimes, when we talk about relationships, when we look at relationships as far as dating, we look at relationships in general, we often forget about the relationship that we have with ourselves. And if we can't have that relationship with ourselves, if we don't repair and work on that relationship with ourselves, if we don't forgive ourselves for the things that we had to do in order to survive in those abusive relationships, how are we going to trust ourselves in the decisions that we make moving forward? So when I do my coaching, in every stage that it is, the biggest thing we work on is working on and repairing that relationship with ourselves, because that's the most important. Relationships are like 90% us, 10% the other person. And nobody, like, it's sometimes we forget that. So working on that relationship that we have with ourselves is ultimately the most important, because you set the bar so high with yourself, how you talk to yourself, how you listen to yourself, what you give yourself, how you treat yourself. If someone comes in your life and doesn't treat you better, or at least meet you at how you treat yourself, that person shouldn't be in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say that again, because I think it's so true. And as you describe the 3 buckets of how you work with your clients, those outlined the 3 buckets that we were discussing prior to that. And I think when you are talking about the self-love, and when you're talking about forgiving yourself, there's an interesting part of the healing process, at least for me, and I'd be curious what your experience was like, where there's almost a grieving process.
Yeah.
Grieving the loss of what you never had.
Period.
Grieving what you hope to find but may not find.
Correct.
Understanding that hurt people, and although we don't necessarily have to forgive, understanding that in order to move forward, sometimes we have to say, this was a hurt person hurting me. that was my experience. It's not everyone's, but I think within that, it's understanding that we don't know everything about everyone. We don't know their story, what experiences they've had. It doesn't make what they did to us right. And also, when we love ourselves, when we understand who we are at our core, we will no longer put up with people like that in our lives.
Correct.
And those were, for me, those were really hard to absorb, to be able to say, like, yeah, I understand, having understanding for why it may have happened, both my part and especially their part. When you talk to people within your coaching practice, what advice would you give as people are starting to enter that phase of self-love?
Yeah. So I want to challenge you for a second, because I know you said that hurt people, right? And I think that is such, I think us as survivors, victims and survivors, we tend to find it easier to have a little bit of empathy for the people who have abused us. And that's understandable to a certain extent. Like I can have empathy for my dad. I can see so many different perspectives of why my dad raised me the way that he did, and realizing all of the trauma that was happening, in that while we were being raised. I don't have that same perspective, that lens from my mother, because every decision she made was intentional, and it was she was intentionally trying to hurt me. Whereas my father was genuinely doing the best that he could and doing what he thought was best. But I think saying hurt people is an outlet, and it gives the abusers a pass. And it's such an excuse for their behavior, because I'm a hurt person, and I have never ever used that as an excuse as to why I hurt the people in my life. So that's an excuse, right? So I challenge us, and I do the same thing with my clients. I challenge us to reframe that just a little bit. Sometimes you just have to shift the way we think slightly. It's not a lot, but I guess the term is pivoting, the new term. I don't know, I'm learning this term. But if you just adjust the way that you view things a little bit, it really does change your perspective, and it doesn't absolve your abuser of the things that they've done to you. Acknowledging and accepting what you've been through is a really important step. And I think that once you're able to say, okay, I've been abused, I've gone through this traumatic experience with this person, and whether you accept it in that moment or you accept it down the road, it's important to at least acknowledge that that's what happened. And as you navigate acknowledging, then you can get to a place of accepting. I do not believe, and I definitely don't subscribe to having to forgive someone for the things that they did to me, because you did what you did, and you have to stand on what you did, and you also have to understand that your actions, there's repercussions for the decisions that you made. You said what you said, you did what you did, stand on that. I don't have to forgive you to heal. What I need to do is forgive myself for the things that I had to do in order to survive, for the things that the way that my nervous system reacted to trauma, and the things that I did to cope with the abusive environment that I was in until I could get to a safe space. That is the most important part of the healing journey, because everybody reacts differently to trauma. A lot of people don't realize that there are four ways you can react: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You have no idea which one of those things is going to happen when you're in these relationships. And so people are like, well, why didn't you just leave? Why did you stay? You staying, and and it happening again, you're just allowing this to happen to you. And it's like, that's not the case at all. We all react very differently to how our body and our brains perceive violence. And so once we're able to at least get to that place that we can acknowledge that that's what we've gone through, and that will open up a completely different realm of your experience where it's less on focusing on being empathetic for them, and it's acknowledging like, well, no, what they did was really fucked up. And there's nothing that will ever excuse that type of behavior. Clients will say, I just want them to tell me why. And I'm like, there's nothing that they're ever going to say that's going to justify what they did to you. And sometimes it might even piss you off even more. It's gonna delay the healing process because you're just gonna feel all over again that you weren't worth them to not abuse you.
Well, it goes back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Right? It's especially in the situations where someone may have experienced childhood trauma, you're never going to get a why.
Yeah.
And even if you do, it doesn't fix the hurt.
Correct.
It doesn't explain the hurt.
Nope.
It's a wish. And I think when you talk about that, and also what you mentioned earlier with gaslighting, where you're trying to understand what is really happening. You know, when someone said this, did they mean this or did they mean this? And I think that it really connects to what you just said about the 4 trauma responses, because I think whether it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, any type of abuse, one of the things that it took me a really long time to understand was actually knowing that I was being triggered, not ever, not a week later, not a day later, but in the moment, understanding that trigger and which direction I was going to go in.
And I think I've experienced every single one of those responses in several different relationships.
And different things can trigger different aspects.
Exactly. Because the way that someone can verbally abuse you, you experience that in a much different way than someone who is physically abusing you. And oftentimes when I was verbally abused, it felt a lot like physical abuse. But there was no marks, there was no scars, there was nothing that would heal and go away. And so to me, in my lived experience, verbal abuse and emotional abuse were the worst forms of abuse for me.
Well, when you talk about the fact that there's no bruises or scars, it's so hard
Physically, but you're subconsciously, they're there.
I fully agree with that. That's the hardest part, because when you go back to the gaslighting and not understanding what is the reality of a situation, it's hard because you can't point to something and say, but this happened. There's a tangible thing that occurred from this. And a lot of times when you're in those situations, it's really hard to pivot and look at things differently.
Yeah.
And so I am going to be, hopefully, as vulnerable as I can be in this situation, but I'd be curious if we were having a conversation and you were my coach. Feel free to ask any questions that you want to set it up, but what would that look like if we were to have that conversation today?
On like how to deal with the trigger in the moment?
Well,
or
I guess putting it all together from where we're at right now, putting all of the pieces we talked about together and wanting to go back into the world and date intentionally, as you said.
Right.
What would that conversation look like with you if I was a client?
Yeah. So what do you want in a relationship? Do you know what you want in a relationship? Do you know what you're looking for?
That is a great question.
See, if you don't know the answer to that immediately and confidently, there's still more work that needs to be dug into to say confidently XYZ, but proceed.
Well, that was exactly what I was thinking. I believe I know what I want in a relationship.
Right.
I still struggle sometimes to articulate it because there are moments where I don't feel like it's attainable. I don't think that it's possible to get there based on what I've been through and also trusting people in general.
Right. I think it's more trusting yourself. That sounds crazy. Obviously, you have to have a level of trust in the other person, but that level of trust in the other person is determined on their actions and their words if they're aligning. And if their actions and their words are aligning with what they're telling you and who they're presenting to you as a person, you now have to have that trust in yourself that that's exactly what's happening. And so it can be difficult, but you really have to trust yourself. So with my husband, when we went on our first date, we're just talking and we're just bantering back and forth, but there was nothing about him that we were sitting across from each other, and I'm leaning as far away from his as possible. I'm not gravitating away from him. There was nothing about him that made me feel unsafe. And so, okay, in that moment, I have to trust that. Okay, he's not giving me any physical reason to not feel safe in his aura, like the bubble that we're in together. Because mind you, it's COVID at this point, so we are 6 feet away from everybody else, but we are still, we're closer to each other than that. So do I feel safe in this dynamic? Okay, yeah, I feel safe in this dynamic. I think that's where a lot of us get caught up too, and I've done this too in my past, of like not thinking that it's attainable. So when we're in the dating field, we kind of settle for what we're getting, because that's all we have at the time. And that's all we think we're going to get. And then we go into these relationships that aren't good for us again. And then we have to start all over again. But it does come down to trust. For me, deal breakers are violent communicators. I don't do violent communication. That is an absolute deal breaker for me. And I will leave you exactly where you're at. And that's exactly what I said to my husband a week, maybe 2 weeks into our relationship. So understanding what your deal breakers are. Deal breakers are things that are that's not going to work for you. And that goes apart in having those conversations. Deal breakers are like, I didn't want to have conversations or be in the same room as someone that didn't want to be in a relationship. That's a deal breaker for me, because that's what I'm looking for. Another deal breaker for me, obviously, was like the nonviolent communication. If we can't have a conversation like how you and I are sitting here talking, if an issue arises in our relationship and we can't keep it cute, can't keep it respectful, you know what I'm saying? Then we can't have that then we're good. So understanding what your deal breakers are. And then you move into the red flags. What are red flags to you? Do you know what red flags are for you? Like what is something that
I run towards, apparently.
That's fair. We've all been there.
I think the red flags are when I feel inside that I can fix the situation and make it better. That is a trauma response from childhood. And I know now that when I feel the need to explain myself, when I feel the need to calm someone down, when I feel the need to try to solve a problem, then those are the moments where I know that something's not right. It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then you have to trust that. Like, this is a red flag. Over here just dancing with the red flag in the hands. Like, what's that scene from White Chicks? Where's Latrell? He's on the dance floor. And he's like with the whistle and the glow sticks, but it's like that with red flags. Yeah, go the opposite direction, babe. Don't do that. But I think it's important. Like, what are red flags? And even if you don't 100% know what the red flags are for you, pay attention to the things that they say. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable with how they speak to you or how they speak about someone else, especially their exes,
or the way they speak to others,
period, pay attention to that. Because then you're like, okay, he's talking crazy, and we're just at this restaurant, and we're just trying to order some chicken tenders, and you're mad because the chicken tenders, they don't have chicken tenders anymore, and you can't figure out what to do, and now you're verbally abusing someone who it's not in their control. Like, if you speak like that to that person, how are you going to speak to me when something goes wrong in a situation? So I think it's just, you have to look at it from every aspect, but more so how it makes you feel, how their behavior makes you feel inside. And you have to trust and listen to what your body is saying. If you're anxious, if you're stressed, like I said, if your body's gravitating away from them, if you feel unsafe, then you really have to take a second and say, okay, what the fuck's going on? Because you shouldn't have that, right? Like, you shouldn't feel that way. And like you said, it should never be that hard. We're not Bob the Builder or Bald the Builder, as I like to say, in anyone's life, right? We are not rehabilitation centers for people who refuse to do the work on themselves. And if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like, oh God, I have to say, look, let me put my cape on and save them. No, sorry. I'm not Superman. I'm not Batman. I'm not Catwoman. I'm not a Wakanda warrior, even though I was for Halloween. Listen, like, here's I'm not here to be your therapist or your mother. And if that's how the vibes that they're giving you, I gotta go. Cause no, thank you. I'm not subscribing. Unsubscribe.
From everything that we talked about today, from your lived experience, from the way that you do coaching, I mean, that was so impactful for me, even just those couple of minutes of asking a question and me hesitating, or being honest about the way I'm feeling and owning it. When you think about everything that we talked about today, what is the message you want people to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, you're the prize. You are the prize. I have 3 commandments, the Battered Heart commandments, okay? I always say drink some water, get some rest, but the most important one is don't let nobody's dusty ass child treat you any kind of way. And when I say it like that, I know that we don't just let these things happen, right? But there is a level of confidence that goes into that. If you know that you're being mistreated, you know that you're not being treated the way that you deserve, they got to go. And so there is a level of confidence that you have to have in yourself, and you build in yourself to where you get to this place where if someone is not treating you like the bad bitch that you are, and that is a non-binary term, if they don't treat you like you're really that bitch, and they don't treat, you're the prize, okay? You are the prize. You are the prize. And if they don't treat you like that, they've got to go. Period. If it doesn't serve you, it doesn't deserve you. And we are taught as people pleasers to just excuse certain behaviors and allow certain things. No, I don't want to be mistreated. I don't want to be talked down to. I want to be lifted up and elevated, and I want to be held up high because I deserve to be held that way. And if they're not doing that, they have to go. Find somebody that will treat you that way, because there's somebody out there that's waiting to make you that passenger princess you want to be, or help you feel safe, or provide a safe space for you. There's someone that's waiting for you.
Well,
so get past that dusty ass child who's treating you any kind of way.
Well, if I learned anything today, that person is you. And
it's yourself.
You have to treat yourself that way first before you can expect someone else to treat you that way.
Yeah, and it's hard to get to that place because, again, we're taught to put ourselves on the back burner. Put yourself first, babe, because they're already doing that. If they have this grandiose view of themselves. And if you can't be the most important person in your world, then how do you expect to be the most important person in someone else's universe, right? Because you have 2 worlds that are coming together, and you're trying to exist in orbit around each other. But if they treat you like Jupiter that got kicked off, or whatever that planet was, or like not really a planet no more, but like I guess you could still be a planet.
Pluto.
Yeah, Pluto, that's the one. Like, no, babe, you're the sun. Like, we're rotating, okay? You know what I'm saying? But it does start with you. And so relationships, you got to date yourself intentionally too. You have to get to know yourself. You have to know what you want, what you need, what you will not settle for. Trust yourself, have that confidence, really, really build up that confidence. And when you have that, no one is ever going to be able to tell you or persuade you, manipulate you to change your mind on what it is that you really want in a relationship. Period.
It's an incredible message because it all comes back to you. Mm-hmm. I'd be curious for you, what is something that someone has told you that's impacted your life and you'll never forget? Because I'm sure you just did that for a lot of people.
Well, that made me cry today, girl. I just got my makeup did. Okay. I think I I don't know if it's something that someone else has said to me. I think it's more of kind of just like what I've said to myself. But I honestly, it's now living in a relationship with someone who uplifts me every single day, every chance that they get. So it's in just, it even comes down to like the environment that you're in. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Whatever darkness that you're in, you feel like you're alone, you feel like you're trapped, you can see the light and you're digging and you're crawling and you're bleeding and you're crying and you're sweating and you're dehydrated and you feel like that light is so unobtainable, but then you realize that that light is literally inside of yourself. Your whole entire world is going to change. You are the light. You are the light that's at the end of that tunnel. And the moment that you choose you, the moment that you bet on yourself, that is the best decision you're ever going to make. And every decision you make after that is going to have you and your best interests and how it's going to impact you on the forefront of your mind. Don't make me cry because I see the tears. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Speaking to my soul.
Because I was looking you dead in your eyes as I was saying it too.
You were, and all I could think was like, I'm about to cry from something that you just said because it touched me so deeply. And it's now the point at which I turn the tables to you to allow you to ask me any question. But before we do that, I think I don't have words for
Y'all,
what
he's
you just
speechless.
said. I am. It was so well said, and it is so true. I hope that when people listen to this, that they can feel the energy that you gave off.
Thank you.
Because it was so incredibly powerful.
Thank you. I'm 31 and a half, and I've spent 31 and a half years really getting comfortable in being the star in my own life when I essentially was taught not to be. And I was always scared and had even imposter syndrome to do that because I didn't know what that was like. But once I started doing that, I started to realize how I was treated differently, the personal relationships that I had, the people that I have in my life, the way that my world, that I have the power and control of producing, directing, scripting, writing, wardrobe, everything. I have power and control over that. My life has never looked the same. I've never been in that same space that I was before. And it's a powerful moment, and it heals so many different versions of yourself that you didn't even know needed to be healed. So my question to you is, what is it that you need so that you can feel safe in your own skin to be who you are, to allow the space for someone to come and love you when you're ready?
I think that in thinking about our conversation today and the things that I want are different than the things that I need. And the things that I want from a relationship are companionship, intimacy, a partner in crime, and someone to laugh with. Mm-hmm. And I think the things that I need are things that in the past I looked for in a relationship or felt like I needed assistance with. But they're really things that I need to be able to do for myself. And those are trust my gut and understand that I am seeing things clearly, and that if I feel like I have to question it, I should question the situation I'm in not if it's actually happening. And feeling safe to take risks, feeling like I can be my own safety net, feeling like I have the power myself to make those changes in my life, and owning it. And it's hard to put yourself out into a space that you don't feel comfortable in, but also being able to do that is so powerful. And as you just said, that is what's going to make those changes. And it's a process. And I think the last part of it is that you have to be patient with yourself.
Give yourself grace. Absolutely.
100% agree with giving yourself grace. That is, giving yourself grace and not beating yourself up for making mistakes is so unbelievably toxic. And I don't think that people talk about it enough. And it's not because you want to be perfect. It's not because you want everyone to love you. It's because you don't believe that everyone will love you. It's because you don't believe you're even close to perfect. And it's those things that you learned earliest in your life that prevent you from doing that, and going back and every day learning and reflecting and being open to the possibility of things that may come up, as difficult as they are.
Yeah, and I think we unknowingly get caught in the cycle of abuse. We get trapped in the cycle of abuse, especially if we experience it in the formative years of our lives. So we oftentimes will continue the verbal and mental and emotional abuse to ourselves because that's what we were used to. And so when we stay in that, unknowingly stay in that cycle of abuse, we're still doing what our abusers are doing to us. And when you can make that delineation between, well, I'm verbally abusing myself by saying that I'm not good enough, and yada, 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 and that's just kind of what I'm used to, then you're able to make those changes. And I actually apply this in my coaching experience when I can identify that my client has a lot of negative self-talk going on. And I challenge them the way that my therapist, again, shout out to Mary, identify 5 affirmations you can say to yourself, and say them to yourself 100 times a day. And you don't have to count if it's 100 times a day, but your brain literally can't tell the difference between the truth and a lie. So if you tell yourself, I'm not worth it, I don't deserve to be loved, your brain's like, okay, cool, we don't deserve to be loved. But if you tell yourself, I deserve to be loved, I deserve to be safe, I deserve healthy relationships, over and over and over again, whether you believe it or not, your brain believes that to be the truth. And so it just, you get your body and your brain in the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like exercising. And then eventually you're going to start to believe it. But what you feed your brain is so important. But we oftentimes get caught in the cycle of abuse, and we don't even realize that we're continuing to abuse ourselves the way that our abusers abused us.
I am so grateful that you took the time to spend with me today. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your story and so many incredible nuggets of information and the power that comes from them. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when we got on our Zoom. We was on our Zoom and we just clicked, and now we're besties, and it is what it is. But thank you. I really do appreciate you having me here. And we had a good moment where you needed a little bit more nurturing to yourself. So give yourself some grace, like you say, give yourself some grace and love yourself the way that you want other people to love you. You got this, babe.
That's it for today's episode of TURTZED, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real, this convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today, and catch you on the next one, because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.